The dust rising from the wagon wheels caught in Florence Zimmerman's throat as she pulled the creaking vehicle to a stop in front of the sprawling ranch house, her hands trembling not from the weight of the reins, but from the terrifying uncertainty of what came next. She could feel her two children pressed against her sides in the wagon seat, 7-year-old Samuel clutching her worn shawl while 5-year-old Emma buried her face against her mother's arm, and Florence knew that if this rancher turned them away, she had nowhere else left to go in all of Tascosa, Texas. The journey from town had taken nearly 2 hours under the unforgiving April sun of 1879, and Florence had spent every moment of it rehearsing what she would say to convince this stranger to give her work. Any work. She would cook, clean, mend fences, tend cattle, anything at all to keep her children fed and sheltered. The small amount of money her late husband had left them was gone, spent on his burial and the mounting debts he had accumulated before the fever took him 3 months prior. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. The outbuildings were well maintained, the corrals properly mended, and she could see cattle grazing in the distant fields. This was clearly a successful operation, which gave her hope. Successful ranchers needed help, did they not? She climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady after the long ride, and helped Samuel and Emma down. Both children stayed close to her skirts, their eyes wide as they took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Florence smoothed her hands over her faded calico dress, wishing she had something better to wear, something that did not advertise her poverty quite so plainly. But this was all she had, and pride would not feed her children. The front door opened before she could knock, and a man stepped out onto the porch. Florence found herself looking up at someone who appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "Help you, madam." His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting commands across open range. Florence straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "Sir, my name is Florence Zimmerman. These are my children, Samuel and Emma. I heard in town that you might be looking for help on your ranch, and I have come to offer my services." The man's expression did not change, but something flickered in those blue-gray eyes. "Looking for ranch hands, madam, cow punchers, men who can rope and brand and break horses." "I can work," Florence said quickly, desperately. "I can cook and clean, I can garden and preserve food. I can sew and mend. I can learn anything else you need. I am a hard worker, sir, and I promise you would not regret giving me a chance." "Madam, this is a cattle ranch, not a boarding house." Florence felt panic rising in her chest. "Please, I will work for just room and board if need be. My children and I, we have nowhere else to go. My husband passed 3 months ago, and I have tried everywhere in Tascosa to find work. You are my last hope, sir. Please." The man's jaw tightened, and he looked away from her toward the horizon. Florence could see the tension in his broad shoulders beneath his worn cotton shirt. When he looked back at her, his expression had softened slightly, though his voice remained gruff. "Name is Owen Sinclair. I own this ranch." He paused, seeming to struggle with something internal. "I do not need a cook or a housekeeper, Mrs. Zimmerman. I have been managing on my own for 5 years now." Florence's heart sank. She had been so certain, so hopeful. "I understand. Thank you for your time, Mr. Sinclair." She turned to gather her children, blinking back tears that she refused to let fall in front of this stranger. Where would they go now? What would she do? Perhaps she could find work in one of the saloons, though the thought made her stomach turn. But she would do anything at all to keep Samuel and Emma safe. Wait. Owen's voice stopped her as she was lifting Emma back into the wagon. Florence turned, hardly daring to hope. He stood at the edge of the porch, one hand gripping the wooden rail. "You already have a home here." Florence stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Sir, the foreman's house." Owen gestured toward a smaller structure about 50 yards from the main house. "Been empty since my foreman moved on last year. 3 bedrooms, fireplace, well maintained. You and your children can live there." "But I must work," Florence said quickly. "I will not accept charity, Mr. Sinclair." "Did not say it was charity." Owen descended the porch steps, moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own domain. "Said you have a home here. As for work, we can figure that out as we go. I imagine there is plenty that needs doing around here that I have been neglecting. But first things first. Let me show you the house, get you and your young ones settled." Florence felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different. "Mr. Sinclair, I do not know how to thank you." "No need for thanks." Owen's expression remained neutral, but there was something gentle in his eyes as he looked at Samuel and Emma. "Children should not be sleeping in wagons. Come on, I will help you with your things." The foreman's house was more than Florence had dared to dream. It was indeed 3 bedrooms, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and even a small washroom. The furniture was simple but solid, and everything was clean if a bit dusty from disuse. "I kept it maintained," Owen explained as Florence moved through the rooms in wonder, Samuel and Emma exploring with the irrepressible energy of children. "Never got around to hiring another foreman, but I figured somebody might need it eventually." Florence ran her hand over the smooth wood of the kitchen table. "It is perfect, Mr. Sinclair, more than perfect. Water pump is out back. Privy is there too. Main house is that way if you need anything." Owen shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I will let you get settled. Come on over to the main house around supper time, and we will discuss what work needs doing." He left before Florence could thank him again, his long strides carrying him quickly across the dusty yard. Florence stood in the doorway of her new home, watching him go, and wondered what had made this solitary rancher so willing to help a desperate widow and her children. The answer, she would learn, was far more complicated than simple Christian charity. That evening, Florence left Samuel and Emma playing with the rag dolls she had made them and walked to the main house, her stomach tight with nerves. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. She had changed into her only other dress, though it was hardly better than the one she had worn earlier, and tied her dark blonde hair back with a piece of ribbon that had seen better days. Owen answered her knock almost immediately, as if he had been waiting nearby. "Mrs. Zimmerman, come in." The interior of the main house was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's home. The furniture was well made if somewhat sparse, and everything seemed to have its place. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and Florence could smell something cooking, though it did not smell particularly appetizing. "I was attempting to make stew," Owen said, a hint of wry humor in his voice. "As you can probably tell, cooking is not my strongest skill." Florence moved to the stove without thinking, years of habit taking over. She lifted the lid on the pot and surveyed the contents. The meat was overcooked, the vegetables were mush, and the seasoning was almost non-existent. "May I, please?" Owen stepped back, gesturing for her to take over. Florence found salt and pepper, added some dried herbs she discovered in a tin, and worked to salvage what she could. It was still not a great stew, but it was edible. As she worked, Owen set the table and then stood awkwardly nearby, clearly unused to having someone else in his kitchen. "How long have you been running this ranch alone, Mr. Sinclair?" Florence asked as she stirred the pot. "5 years." Had help at first after my father died and left me the place. But the hands come and go, and I got used to doing most of it myself. He paused. Easier that way sometimes. Florence heard the loneliness beneath his words and recognized it. She had been lonely too, even before her husband died. Their marriage had not been an easy one, and she felt a wave of guilt for feeling almost relieved to be free of it, despite the hardship his death had brought. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, changing the subject. "How many head of cattle do you run?" Owen seemed to relax slightly as he began to talk about his operation. He ran about 500 head, he explained, with plans to expand if he could find reliable help. The ranch encompassed nearly 3,000 acres, much of it good grazing land with access to water from a creek that ran through the property. He sold his beef to buyers who came through Tascosa several times a year, and he was building a reputation for quality stock. As he talked, Florence found herself studying him more closely. Owen Sinclair was a handsome man beneath the weathered exterior, with strong features and those striking eyes. But more than that, there was something solid about him, something dependable. He spoke about his ranch with obvious pride and knowledge, and Florence sensed that he was a man who kept his word. "The stew should be ready," she said finally, ladling it into bowls. They sat at the table together, and the silence that fell was slightly awkward. Florence was acutely aware that this was the first time she had sat down to a meal with a man who was not her husband since she had married at 19, 8 years ago. It felt strange and slightly scandalous, even though they were only discussing work. "So," Owen said after a few bites, "about the work you will be doing here." "Yes, sir, I am ready to do whatever you need." Owen set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I am going to be honest with you. I do not really need a housekeeper. I have been managing fine on my own, and I like my privacy. But I can see that you are in a difficult situation, and those children of yours deserve a safe place to live." Florence felt her cheeks burn. "Mr. Sinclair, I told you I will not accept charity, and I am not offering it." Owen held up a hand. "Let me finish. There is work that needs doing around here, work I have been putting off because I do not have the time or, frankly, the skill. The garden is overgrown and not producing like it should. The chicken coop needs to be rebuilt, and I have not kept chickens in 2 years because I do not have time to tend them properly. All the clothes and linens in this house need mending. The books need to be updated because I have been too tired at the end of each day to keep proper records. Those are real jobs, Mrs. Zimmerman, that need doing. If you are willing to take them on, you will more than earn your keep." Florence felt some of her tension ease. "I can do all of those things, Mr. Sinclair. I can do them well." "Good. We will work out the details as we go. For now, just get yourself and your children settled. You have been through an ordeal, and you need time to catch your breath." Owen returned to his stew, signaling that the conversation was over. But as Florence walked back to the foreman's house under the darkening sky, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The next morning, Florence woke early, as was her habit. Samuel and Emma were still sleeping in the bedroom they shared, curled up together like puppies. Florence stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, her heart aching with love and fierce protectiveness. They had been through so much in the past few months, and they deserved this chance at stability. She dressed quickly in her oldest clothes and tied her hair back with a scarf. Then she set about making breakfast for her children, grateful for the supplies that Owen had brought to the house the previous evening. He had left a basket on the porch filled with basics: flour, salt, sugar, eggs, bacon, milk. More kindness that she would need to repay. After feeding Samuel and Emma and getting them settled with instructions to stay close to the house, Florence set out to explore the ranch properly. She wanted to see exactly what she was working with, what tasks needed to be prioritized. The garden was indeed in poor condition, overgrown with weeds and producing only the hardiest of volunteers. But the soil looked good, and the location had decent sun and access to water. Florence could work with this. She had always enjoyed gardening, and her mother had taught her well. The chicken coop was in worse shape than the garden. One side half collapsed, and the wire fencing rusted through in places. This would require more extensive work, probably more than she could manage alone. She would need to ask Owen for help with the heavy repairs. As she was examining the coop, she heard the sound of approaching horses. Florence looked up to see Owen riding in from the range, accompanied by two other men. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying across the morning air, and Florence felt like an intruder witnessing this moment of camaraderie. Owen spotted her and changed direction, riding over to where she stood. Up close, on horseback, he looked even more at home in this landscape, as if he were a part of it. "Mrs. Zimmerman, you are up early. Force of habit, Mr. Sinclair. I was looking at what needs to be done." Owen dismounted in one smooth motion and walked over to examine the coop. "This is pretty far gone. I can get some of the boys to help rebuild it when they have time between roundup tasks." "I would appreciate that. I can do the lighter work, but I will need help with the structural repairs. Consider it done." Owen glanced toward the foreman's house, where Samuel had emerged and was watching them with wide eyes. "Your boy might like to come out and see the horses sometime, if you are agreeable to it." Florence's first instinct was to say no, to keep her children close and safe. But she saw the way Samuel was staring at the horses with obvious fascination, and she knew that her son needed to learn the ways of this new life they had found themselves in. "That would be kind of you, Mr. Sinclair. Samuel would love that, I am sure." Owen nodded and then swung back into his saddle. "I will be working the East Range today. If you need anything, Jake or Pete can help you. They are the two hands I have on full time." He rode off before Florence could respond, and she was struck again by his tendency to offer help and then retreat before being thanked. It was as if he was uncomfortable with his own generosity. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Florence woke early and made breakfast for her children, then set about her tasks. She started with the garden, spending hours pulling weeds, turning soil, and planning what she would plant. She took stock of the linens and clothes in the main house, and began the systematic work of mending what could be saved and marking what needed to be replaced. Owen kept his distance, mostly. He was out on the range most days from dawn until dusk, and Florence rarely saw him except in passing. But she noticed small things. The way he always tipped his hat to her when they crossed paths. The way he spoke gently to Samuel when the boy shyly approached him one evening to ask about the horses. The way he left fresh meat hanging in the cool house with a brief note saying she should use what she needed. At night, Florence would sit in her little house with her children and feel a sense of peace that she had not known in years. Her marriage to Walter Zimmerman had not been a love match. He had been 15 years her senior, a friend of her father's who had offered to marry her when her family faced financial difficulties. She had been young and dutiful, and she had said yes because it was what was expected of her. Walter had not been cruel exactly, but he had been indifferent. He had wanted a wife to cook and clean and warm his bed, and Florence had been that for him. But there had been no tenderness, no real partnership. When he died, she had grieved for the loss of security more than the loss of a companion. Now, living on Owen Sinclair's ranch, Florence found herself thinking about what a real partnership might look like. She saw the way Owen worked alongside his hired hands, not above them. She saw the care he took with his animals and his land. She heard the quiet loneliness in his voice when he spoke about running the ranch alone, and she wondered what his story was, what had made him so solitary. She got her answer one evening about 3 weeks after they had arrived. Florence was working in the garden in the fading light, trying to finish planting a row of beans before full dark, when Owen rode up. "You are going to work yourself into the ground, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, dismounting and tying his horse to the garden fence. Florence straightened, pressing one hand to her aching back. "I want to get everything planted before it gets too late in the season. It is only late April. You have time." Owen looked at the neat rows she had already planted, the weeds all cleared away, and nodded in approval. "You have done good work here. This garden has not looked this good in years. Thank you." Florence brushed dirt from her hands and accepted the compliment with a small smile. "I enjoy it. There is something satisfying about making things grow." Owen leaned against the fence, and Florence sensed that he had something on his mind. She waited, having learned that pushing him to speak would only make him retreat. "My wife used to love gardening," he said finally, his voice quiet. "She could make anything grow, even in the worst conditions. Said she had a gift for it." Florence's heart gave a small, unexpected lurch. Wife. She had not known he had been married. "What happened to her, if you do not mind my asking?" "Cholera. 5 years ago. Swept through Tascosa and took a lot of people with it. Sarah was one of them." Owen's jaw tightened. "We had only been married 2 years. She was 23 years old." "I am so sorry." Florence's voice was soft with genuine sympathy. She understood loss, understood the way it could hollow you out. "It is why I have been alone since then. Did not see the point in trying to find someone else, to risk that kind of hurt again." Owen looked at her directly. "I am telling you this because I want you to understand. I offered you and your children a place here because it was the right thing to do, not because I am looking for anything more. I do not want there to be any confusion about that." Florence felt her cheeks warm, though whether from embarrassment or something else, she could not say. "I understand, Mr. Sinclair. I am grateful for your honesty. And I want you to know that I am not looking for anything beyond work and a safe place for my children either. My marriage was not a happy one, and I am in no hurry to repeat the experience." Something shifted in Owen's expression, a flicker of understanding passing between them. They were both wounded in their own ways, both wary of risking their hearts again. "Good," Owen said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Then we understand each other." But as the days turned into weeks and spring deepened into early summer, Florence found that understanding and feeling were two very different things. She noticed the way her heart lifted when she heard Owen's voice in the yard. She found herself watching for him to ride in from the range, telling herself it was just to see if he would want supper, nothing more. She thought about the rare times he smiled, how it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less burdened. And she saw the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. A long, considering look, as if he was working through a difficult problem in his mind. The tension between them grew, unspoken but undeniable. They were both fighting against it, both determined to keep their distance. But proximity and loneliness were powerful forces, and they were only human. The breaking point came in mid-June, during a summer storm that rolled in fast and furious one evening. Florence had been hanging laundry when she saw the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, and hurried to get everything down before the rain started. She was carrying the basket back to the house when the first drops fell, quickly turning into a downpour. She was soaked within seconds, her hair plastered to her face and her dress clinging to her body. The basket grew heavy with wet clothes, and she struggled to keep her footing in the mud that was rapidly forming. She was halfway to the house when she slipped, going down hard on one knee and spilling the basket. Damn it, she muttered, a rare curse escaping her lips as she struggled to gather the clothes that were now covered in mud. Here, let me help. Owen appeared beside her, equally soaked, and began gathering the fallen laundry. Leave it, he said when she tried to protest. We will get it sorted out inside. He took her elbow and guided her toward the main house, which was closer than the foreman's house. They stumbled inside, dripping and muddy, and Owen kicked the door shut behind them. For a moment they just stood there, looking at each other. Florence was acutely aware of how her dress was clinging to her, of the way Owen's wet shirt revealed the muscled contours of his chest and arms. She saw the way his gaze traveled over her and then jerked away, his jaw tightening. "I will get you a towel," he said, his voice rough. "Wait." Florence reached out without thinking and caught his arm. Owen. It was the first time she had used his given name, and she saw the way it affected him. His eyes darkened, and he turned back to face her fully. Florence. Her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with being cold and wet. "What are we doing?" she asked softly. This distance we are keeping, this pretending that there is nothing between us." "We agreed," Owen said, but his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "We said we did not want complications. I know what we said." Florence leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly, but I think we were lying to ourselves. Owen made a low sound, something between a groan and a laugh. "I have been lying to myself since the day you drove up to my door, telling myself I was just helping someone in need, that it did not matter that you were beautiful and brave and made me feel something I thought I would never feel again." Florence's breath caught. "Owen." He kissed her then, a tentative brush of lips that quickly deepened into something more desperate. Florence kissed him back, her hands fisting in his wet shirt, 5 years of loneliness and longing pouring into that single point of contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I am not good at this," he said. "I do not know how to do this anymore." "Neither do I," Florence admitted. "My marriage, it was not like this. I never felt like this, scared, hopeful." Owen pulled back enough to look at her properly. "I cannot promise to be easy to love, Florence. I've gotten used to being alone, to keeping people at arm's length, and I am terrified of losing someone again." "I am not asking for promises," Florence said, though her heart ached at his words. "I am just asking for honesty, for the chance to see where this might go." Owen studied her face for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. "I can do that. I want to do that." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside they had found a different kind of shelter, one that had nothing to do with walls and roofs, and everything to do with two wounded hearts finally willing to risk hoping again. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Florence woke in her own bed in the foreman's house, where Owen had insisted on walking her after the rain had stopped, and for a moment she wondered if the previous evening had been a dream. But then she touched her lips, still tender from kissing, and smiled. Samuel and Emma were full of questions about the storm over breakfast, excited by the drama of it. Florence answered them patiently while her mind kept drifting back to Owen, to the feel of his hands on her face, the taste of his kiss. She was both nervous and eager to see him again, unsure of what would happen now that they had acknowledged what was between them. Would he regret it? Would he retreat back into his protective solitude? But when Owen appeared at her door mid-morning, asking if she and the children would like to come see the new foal that had been born overnight, Florence saw no regret in his eyes, only warmth and a hint of shyness that she found endearing. "We would love to," she said, and Samuel let out a whoop of excitement. They walked to the barn together, Samuel running ahead while Emma held Florence's hand, and chattered about the baby horse she was about to see. Owen walked close enough to Florence that their shoulders occasionally brushed, and each touch sent a small thrill through her. The foal was long-legged and wobbly, staying close to its mother's side. Samuel was entranced, asking a million questions that Owen answered with surprising patience. Emma was more hesitant, but when Owen gently showed her how to approach the mare and let the horse smell her hand, she giggled with delight. Florence watched them together and felt her heart expand. Owen was good with her children, patient and kind in a way that Walter had never been. He treated them as small people worthy of respect, not as nuisances to be tolerated. "You are good with them," she said quietly as they walked back to the house, the children running ahead to explore. Owen shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "They are good kids. You have done well with them." It has not been easy, especially Samuel. He has been angry since his father died, acting out, but here I see him starting to settle, to be happy again. Florence paused. "You have given us a gift, Owen, more than just a place to live. You have given us peace." "You have given me something too," Owen said, stopping and turning to face her. "This ranch, it has felt like a tomb for 5 years, just me and the ghosts going through the motions, but since you came, there is life here again." Laughter. "I did not realize how much I had been missing it until I heard your children playing in the yard." Florence reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then we are helping each other. That is a good foundation. For what? For whatever comes next." What came next was a summer of discovery. Owen and Florence began spending more time together, finding excuses to be near each other. He would come by the garden to check on her progress and end up staying to help with the heavier work. She would bring lunch out to him and the hands working in the fields and linger to talk. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch of the foreman's house and talk about everything and nothing. They learned about each other in layers. Owen told her about growing up on the ranch, about the difficult relationship he had had with his demanding father, about how he had met Sarah at a church social and been immediately smitten. Florence shared her own story about her unhappy marriage, about the relief and guilt she felt about being widowed, about her dreams for her children's future. They also learned about each other through touch. Owen taught Florence to ride, his hands steady on her waist as he helped her into the saddle, his voice patient as he instructed her. Florence cut Owen's hair one evening, her fingers gentle in his thick waves, and felt him relax under her care. They held hands. They kissed, slow and sweet. But they did not rush, both of them savoring this careful courtship. "I do not want to confuse the children," Florence said one night as they sat close together on the porch swing. "They have been through so much upheaval. I do not want them to see us together and get their hopes up if we do not work out." "Do you think we will not work out?" Owen asked, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest so she could hear his heartbeat. "I do not know. I hope not. But I have learned that hope and reality are not always the same thing." Owen was quiet for a moment, his hand tracing idle patterns on her arm. "Samuel asked me the other day if I was going to be his new father." Florence sat up, alarmed. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that I cared very much for his mother and for him and Emma, and that I hoped we could all be a family someday, but that it was something the grown-ups needed to figure out." Owen met her eyes. "Was that wrong?" "No." Florence felt tears prick her eyes. "No, it was perfect. Better than I could have said it. I meant it, Florence. I do want us to be a family. I am just trying to do this right, to not rush things." Owen cupped her face in his hands. "I love you. I think I have loved you since you stood in my yard begging for work with your chin up and your eyes full of fire. I am done pretending otherwise." Florence's heart felt too big for her chest. "I love you too. It scares me how much." Then we will be scared together." They told the children the next day, sitting them down and explaining carefully that Owen and their mother cared for each other very much and wanted to spend more time together as a family. Samuel was thrilled, immediately asking if this meant Owen would teach him to rope cattle. Emma climbed into Owen's lap and asked if he would read her a bedtime story sometime. "Anytime you want, sweetheart," Owen said, and Florence saw the emotion in his eyes as he held her daughter. That night, Florence lay in bed and let herself imagine a future. Marriage to Owen. More children, perhaps. Growing old together on this ranch, building a life filled with love and partnership. It seemed too good to be true, but for the first time in her life, Florence let herself believe in it anyway. But the path to happiness was not without its obstacles. In late July, a man came to the ranch looking for Florence. She was hanging laundry when she heard an unfamiliar voice calling her name and turned to see a stranger standing in the yard, Florence Zimmerman. He was a thin man with a calculating look in his eyes. "Yes, may I help you?" "Name is Robert Quinn. I was business partner to your late husband." Florence felt her stomach drop. Walter's business dealings had been murky at best, and she had tried to settle what debts she could before leaving town. "I am sorry, Mr. Quinn, but I have no money to pay you if that is why you are here." "Not here for money, here about the land." "What land?" "The land your husband won off me in a card game 6 months before he died. 40 acres just outside Tascosa. It is mine and I want it back." Florence stared at him in confusion. "I do not know anything about any land. Walter never mentioned it." "Well, he owned it, which means it passed to you when he died, and I want to buy it back. I will give you a fair price." "I do not own any land, Mr. Quinn. You must be mistaken." Quinn's expression hardened. "I am not mistaken. Your husband had the deed. If you do not have it, then you had better find it, because that land is valuable and I intend to get it back one way or another." "Is there a problem here?" Florence had never been so relieved to hear Owen's voice. He strode up beside her, placing himself slightly between her and Quinn, his body language protective. Quinn looked Owen up and down. "Who are you?" "Owen Sinclair. I own this ranch and Mrs. Zimmerman works for me. State your business and then move along." "My business is with the widow, not you." "Her business is my business." Owen's voice was flat and hard in a way Florence had never heard before. "Now explain what you want or get off my land." Quinn repeated his story about the land and the deed, his tone turning wheedling when he addressed Florence again. "I will give you $200 for it, Mrs. Zimmerman. That is more than fair." "She said she does not have any deed," Owen said. "You heard her answer. Now leave." "This is not over," Quinn said, pointing a finger at Florence. "That land is mine by rights and I will get it back." He left, but Florence felt shaken. Owen took her arm and guided her into the house, sitting her down at the kitchen table. "What was all that about?" he asked gently. Florence explained what little she knew, her hands trembling. "Walter gambled, I knew that. But he never told me about winning any land. I went through all his papers when he died, trying to settle his affairs. There was no deed. Maybe he sold it before he died. Maybe, but why would this Quinn man think I have it if Walter sold it?" Owen frowned. "I do not like this. Something feels wrong about it, and the way he looked at you, it made my skin crawl." "Do you think he will come back?" "Probably. Men like that do not give up easily." Owen reached across the table and took her hand. "But I will not let him hurt you or the children. You are safe here, Florence." "I promise you that." Florence nodded, wanting to believe him. But a sense of unease had settled over her, a feeling that the peace they had found was more fragile than she had thought. Quinn did come back, 2 days later, and this time he was not alone. He brought a man he introduced as a lawyer from Amarillo, and they insisted on speaking to Florence. Owen was out on the range, and Florence had to face them alone. though she made sure Samuel and Emma stayed inside the house. The lawyer, a portly man named Henderson, explained that he had done some research and confirmed that Walter Zimmerman had indeed won 40 acres from Robert Quinn in a poker game. "The deed should have been among your husband's effects, Mrs. Zimmerman," Henderson said. "If you could produce it, we can settle this matter quickly and fairly." "I have told you I do not have any deed," Florence said, frustration making her voice sharp. "I do not know what happened to it or if it even existed." "It existed," Quinn said. "I had to sign it over myself." "Your husband had it when he left the saloon that night. Then perhaps he lost it, or sold it to someone else. I do not know, and frankly I do not care. I have no claim to any land and no interest in this dispute." Henderson cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Zimmerman, if you inherited your husband's estate, then you do own that land, deed or no deed. The transaction was legal and witnessed. The land is yours." Florence felt her head spinning. "I do not want it." "Then sell it to my client. He is offering a generous price." "How generous?" The voice came from behind them, and Florence turned to see Owen striding up, his face set in hard lines. Henderson named a figure, $250. Owen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That land is worth at least 1,000, probably more, given how Tascosa is growing." "You are trying to cheat her," Quinn's face reddened. "This is none of your concern, Sinclair." "It is absolutely my concern. Mrs. Zimmerman is under my protection, and I will not stand by while you try to swindle her." Owen turned to Florence. "Do not sign anything or agree to anything. Not until we have time to figure out what this land is really worth and what you want to do with it." "I want nothing to do with it," Florence said. "I want them to leave. You heard the lady, leave my property. Now." Quinn opened his mouth to argue, but something in Owen's expression made him think better of it. He and Henderson left, but Quinn's parting words were ominous. "You have not heard the last of this." After they left, Florence sank down onto the porch steps, her legs suddenly weak. Owen sat beside her, his arm going around her shoulders. "I am sorry," she said. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door." "You did not bring anything. That Quinn fellow, he is the trouble, not you." Owen pulled her closer. "We will figure this out, Florence. I will ride into Amarillo myself if I have to and find out exactly what this land situation is. But I will not let anyone take advantage of you." Florence turned her face into his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent of horse and leather and clean sweat. "What if I do own this land? What should I do with it?" "That is for you to decide. But whatever you choose, I will support you." In the end, Owen did ride to Amarillo, taking Jake with him for backup. They were gone for 3 days, and Florence spent the time alternating between worry for his safety and appreciation for what he was doing for her. When he returned, he had news. "The land is real, and it is yours," he said, spreading out papers on the kitchen table. "I found the original deed filed with the county. Walter won it fair and square, and with his death it passed to you. And Quinn was trying to rob you blind. That 40 acres is right in the path of the railroad expansion. It is worth at least $1,500, maybe more." Florence stared at the papers, her mind reeling. $1,500. That was more money than she had ever imagined having. That was security. That was her children's future. "What should I do?" she asked. "You have options. You could sell it, make a nice profit. You could hold on to it, wait and see if the value increases. Or—" Owen paused, looking uncertain for the first time since he had returned. "Or what? Or you could use it as your dowry, bring it into a marriage as your contribution." He met her eyes. "Marry me, Florence." Florence's breath caught in her throat. "What?" Owen took her hands in his. "I know we said we would take things slow. I know we have only known each other a few months. But I am sure of this, sure of you, sure of us. I want you to be my wife. I want Samuel and Emma to be my children. I want to build a life with you, a real partnership, not like what you had before. I want to love you and be loved by you for the rest of our lives." Tears were streaming down Florence's face. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Owen pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and thorough, a kiss that held promise and passion and forever. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "When?" Florence asked. "When should we marry?" "As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if we can manage it." Owen laughed at her expression. "I am joking. Sort of. But soon, Florence. I do not want to wait any longer than we have to." "Neither do I." They married 3 weeks later in the small church in Tascosa, with Samuel and Emma standing up with them and half the town in attendance. Florence wore a new dress that Owen had insisted on buying her, a beautiful blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Owen wore his Sunday best and looked so handsome that Florence could hardly believe he was hers. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Owen kissed her, Florence felt a joy so complete that it took her breath away. This was what marriage should be. This partnership, this love, this choosing each other every day. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food provided by half the women in the county, all of them eager to celebrate Owen Sinclair finally settling down again. There was music and dancing, and Florence danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling like she was living in a dream. "Happy?" Owen asked, his arms around her waist as they swayed to the music. "So happy I am afraid I will wake up. This is real. We are real." Owen kissed her forehead. "And it is just the beginning." That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep in the foreman's house under the watch of a neighbor woman, Owen carried Florence over the threshold of the main house. Their house now. He set her down gently in the bedroom, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Florence felt suddenly shy, nervous in a way she had not expected. Her wedding night with Walter had been awkward and perfunctory, and she had no reason to expect anything different now. But Owen was different. He approached her slowly, giving her time to adjust, to accept. He helped her out of her dress with gentle hands, pressing kisses to each new bit of skin he revealed. And when they finally came together, it was nothing like Florence had experienced before. It was tender and passionate, awkward in places because they were still learning each other, but full of love and care and mutual pleasure. Afterwards, lying in Owen's arms with her head on his chest, Florence felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Owen asked immediately, concern in his voice. "No, no, you were perfect. I am overwhelmed. I did not know it could be like this, that I could feel like this." Owen tightened his arms around her. "Neither did I, not anymore. I thought that part of my life was over. But with you, everything is new again. Everything is better." They made love again in the early hours of the morning, slower this time, exploring and learning. And when the sun finally rose, Florence woke in her husband's arms and knew that she had found her home. The months that followed were the happiest of Florence's life. She and the children moved into the main house, and they began to make it a true home. Florence cooked meals in the big kitchen while Emma helped, and Samuel talked about his day learning ranch work from Owen. In the evenings, they would sit together in the parlor, Owen reading the newspaper while Florence sewed and the children played. It was ordinary and domestic, and Florence loved every moment of it. She also loved the nights when the children were asleep and she and Owen could be alone. They made love often, learning each other's bodies and desires, and Florence discovered a passion in herself that she had not known existed. Owen was an attentive lover, always making sure she found pleasure, and the intimacy between them only deepened their emotional connection. In October, Florence realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not been certain until the nausea and fatigue became undeniable. She was both thrilled and nervous, wondering how Owen would feel about adding to their family so soon. She told him one evening after dinner, catching him alone in the barn where he was checking on one of the horses. "Owen, I have something to tell you." He turned, immediately picking up on her serious tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong." We are going to have a baby." Owen's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide and joyful that it transformed him. "A baby, we are having a baby. Yes, sometime in the spring, I think." Owen let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. "I am so happy," he said against her lips. "So incredibly happy. You are not upset about it being so soon?" "Why would I be upset? Florence, this is wonderful, a baby, our baby." Owen placed his hand on her still flat stomach, his expression filled with wonder. "I love you so much, I love you too." They told Samuel and Emma that night, and both children were excited about the prospect of a new sibling. Emma immediately began planning what toys she would share, while Samuel asked if it would be a boy so he could teach him about horses. The pregnancy was not easy. Florence was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Owen was endlessly patient, holding her hair back when she was ill, bringing her weak tea and dry toast, rubbing her feet when they ached. He took over more of the household duties and hired a woman from town to help with the cooking and cleaning so Florence could rest. "You are doing too much," Florence protested weakly one afternoon when she found him scrubbing floors. "I am doing exactly enough," Owen said firmly. "You are growing our child. That is the most important job. Everything else can wait." As winter deepened and Florence's belly began to swell with new life, they settled into a peaceful routine. The issue with Robert Quinn had been resolved when Owen had threatened to expose Quinn's attempts to defraud Florence to every business owner in Tascosa. Quinn had backed off, and Florence had eventually sold the land to a railroad company for $2,000, a sum that made her dizzy just thinking about it. The money was safely deposited in a bank in Amarillo under both her and Owen's names, set aside for the children's futures. Christmas was magical that year. Owen cut down a small pine tree and brought it into the house, and Florence and the children decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments. On Christmas morning, Samuel and Emma woke to find small gifts under the tree. A wooden horse that Owen had carved for Samuel, a rag doll with a painted face for Emma, and new dresses and shirts for both children that Florence had sewn. "This is the best Christmas ever," Samuel said, hugging his new horse to his chest, and Florence had to blink back tears. Owen pulled her close, his hand resting on her pregnant belly. "The first of many," he promised. The baby came in early April, on a morning when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom across the prairie. Florence's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Owen feared he would lose her. He stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, whispering encouragements. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with strong lungs and a full head of dark hair, Owen wept openly. "A son," Florence said, exhausted but glowing as she held the baby. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Owen asked, unable to take his eyes off his child. "What was your father's name?" "Henry, but I never liked him much," Florence smiled. "What about names you do like?" They settled on James, after Florence's late father, with the middle name of Henry as a nod to Owen's heritage. Little James Sinclair was welcomed into the family with joy, with Samuel and Emma both immediately smitten with their new brother. Owen was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with the baby when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, sitting for hours just watching James sleep. Florence would sometimes wake in the night to find Owen's side of the bed empty and discover him in the nursery, holding his son and talking to him in a low voice about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. "I never thought I would have this again," Owen confessed to her one night when James was a few weeks old. "A family, children, someone to pass the ranch on to. After Sarah died, I thought I was done. But you gave this back to me, Florence. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Florence said, leaning against his shoulder as they watched their son sleep. "You gave me love, real love. I did not even know what I was missing until I found it with you." Life settled into a new rhythm with 3 children in the house. The ranch continued to prosper under Owen's management, and he expanded the operation, hiring more hands and increasing the herd. Florence managed the household with the help of a hired girl from town, and she continued to maintain her beloved garden, which now provided most of their vegetables through the growing season. Samuel grew into a skilled young horseman under Owen's tutelage, and it was clear that he would be a rancher himself someday. Emma was quieter but equally determined, and she showed a talent for figures that led Owen to begin teaching her the business side of ranching. And little James was the darling of the family, a happy baby who grew into a rambunctious toddler. 2 years after James was born, Florence became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882, she gave birth to twin girls. Margaret and Sarah, named for Florence's mother and Owen's first wife. "Are you sure?" Florence asked when Owen suggested the name Sarah. "It does not bother you. Sarah would have loved you," Owen said, holding one of the tiny girls in his big hands with surprising gentleness. "She would have been happy that I found love again, that I was not alone. I want to honor her memory, and I think naming our daughter after her is a good way to do that." The twins were a handful, identical in appearance but different in temperament. Margaret was quiet and observant, while Sarah was bold and adventurous. Between them and James, who was now a demanding 2-year-old, Florence had her hands full. But she had never been happier. The years flowed by like water. Samuel turned 16 and became Owen's right hand on the ranch, showing a natural aptitude for the work. Emma surprised everyone by announcing at 13 that she wanted to be a teacher, and Owen and Florence supported her ambition, arranging for her to attend a teaching college in Dallas when she was old enough. James grew into a serious boy who loved books almost as much as he loved horses, and the twins were a constant source of entertainment and occasional chaos. Florence watched her children grow and marveled at how her life had changed. From that desperate day when she had driven up to Owen's ranch with nothing but 2 frightened children and a prayer, to this life of abundance and love, it seemed like a miracle. She and Owen grew deeper in love with each passing year. They still made time for each other despite the demands of children and ranch, stealing moments alone to talk and touch and simply be together. Their physical relationship remained passionate, and Florence never stopped being grateful that she had found a man who saw her as a partner in every sense of the word. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen took Florence on a trip to San Antonio, leaving the children in the care of Emma, who at 18 was more than capable of managing her younger siblings. It was the first time they had been alone together for more than a few hours since their wedding night, and it felt like a second honeymoon. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked through the streets hand in hand like young sweethearts. And at night, in their private room, They made love with the freedom of knowing they would not be interrupted, rediscovering each other with the passion of newlyweds and the skill of longtime lovers. "I would do it all again," Florence said one night as they lay tangled together in the afterglow. "Every hardship, every moment of fear and uncertainty if it meant ending up here with you." "So would I," Owen said, kissing her temple. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Florence Sinclair. You and our children. You are my whole world." They returned home to find that Emma had managed the household beautifully. Samuel had kept the ranch running smoothly, and the younger children had only gotten into minor mischief. Life continued its steady, happy course. Samuel married at 20, bringing home a sweet girl from Amarillo named Lucy, and within a year, Florence and Owen were grandparents. Emma became a teacher as she had dreamed, taking a position at the school in Tascosa. James decided he wanted to study law and left for college in Austin. And the twins, now 16, were beginning to attract the attention of young men in the area, much to Owen's dismay. "They are too young," he grumbled one evening after chasing off yet another hopeful suitor. Florence laughed and patted his arm. "They are the same age I was when I married Walter. Though I agree that they should wait for someone better than these local boys." "They should wait until they are 30, Owen muttered, making Florence laugh again. She loved this man, loved his protectiveness of their daughters, loved the way he had embraced fatherhood so completely. She loved the silver that was now threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the way his body still fit perfectly against hers after all these years. They were in their 40s now, no longer young but not yet old. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, cattle diseases and financial scares. They had buried Owen's last remaining aunt and mourned when Pete, one of the longtime ranch hands, passed away. But through it all, they had each other. Margaret married first of the twins at 19, to a young lawyer from Amarillo who James had befriended at college. Sarah followed a year later, marrying a rancher's son from a neighboring spread. Both weddings were joyful occasions, with the whole community turning out to celebrate. Florence stood next to Owen at Sarah's wedding reception, watching their daughter dance with her new husband, and felt a bittersweet pang. Her children were all grown now, launched into their own lives. The house that had once been so full of noise and chaos was quiet now, with only her and Owen remaining. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist. "That I am proud of them, all of them. We did well, you and I. We did. And now we get to enjoy being alone together again." Owen pulled her closer. "I have been looking forward to having you all to myself." Florence smiled up at him. "Is that so?" "Very much so." Owen's eyes held a wicked gleam that still made her heart race even after all these years. "I have plans for you, Mrs. Sinclair." "I look forward to hearing them." They danced together as the sun set over the Texas prairie, two people who had found each other when they were both broken and had built something beautiful together. Their love story had started with desperation and charity, but it had grown into something deep and true and lasting. Years continued to pass. Samuel took over more of the ranch operations as Owen began to slow down, though he remained involved in the decision-making. More grandchildren arrived, and the house that had been so quiet began to fill with noise again as the little ones came to visit. Florence's hair turned gray, and Owen's face became more lined, but their love never faded. They still held hands while sitting on the porch in the evenings. They still stole kisses when they thought no one was looking. They still made love, slower and gentler now, but no less meaningful. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a huge celebration. The ranch was filled with people, multiple generations of family and friends who had been touched by Owen and Florence's love story. There were speeches and toasts, stories shared about the couple who had built such a beautiful life together. Samuel stood and raised his glass. To my parents. My mother came to this ranch 25 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. And my father, he saw her worth immediately and gave her and us a home. But what they built together is so much more than a home. They built a legacy of love and partnership that I hope to emulate in my own marriage. To Owen and Florence Sinclair, may they have many more years together. Many more years, everyone echoed, and Florence felt tears slip down her cheeks. Owen leaned over and kissed her cheek. 25 years, he murmured. Best years of my life. Mine too, Florence whispered back. They celebrated their 30th anniversary quietly, just the two of them, taking another trip to San Antonio and reliving their second honeymoon. They were in their 50s now, grandparents many times over, and the ranch was firmly in Samuel's capable hands, with James handling the legal aspects from his law office in Amarillo. Florence's health began to decline slightly as she entered her 60s. Nothing serious, just the aches and pains of age, a tendency to tire more easily. Owen became even more protective, constantly fussing over her, making sure she did not overwork herself. "I am fine," she would protest, but she secretly loved his attention. "You are precious to me," Owen would say. "More precious than anything in this world. I am allowed to fuss." They spent their days in comfortable companionship, working in the garden together, taking slow rides around the property, playing with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren when they visited. The nights were spent curled together in the bed they had shared for decades, talking about their lives, their memories, their blessings. On a warm evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Owen took Florence's hand and brought it to his lips. "You remember the day you drove up to this house?" he asked, "begging for work with those two scared children." "Of course I remember. It was the day my real life began. I took one look at you and thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen, standing there with nothing, asking for a chance. And when you said you would not accept charity, that you had to work for what you received, I knew you were someone special." "I was terrified," Florence admitted, "but more terrified of the alternative, of failing my children." "You never could have failed them. You are too strong for that." Owen kissed her hand again. "Telling you that you already had a home here, that was the best decision I ever made, because I got everything I could ever want. A wife, children, a family, love, real love." "So did I," Florence said softly. "You gave me everything, Owen, a home, security. But most importantly, you gave me love. You showed me what marriage should be, what partnership looks like. You made me happy every single day. And you did the same for me. After Sarah died, I thought I was done with happiness, but you brought joy back into my life. You and those beautiful children of yours who became mine. You saved me, Florence. We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They had lived a good life, a full life, rich with love and family and purpose. They had weathered storms and celebrated victories. They had grown old together, their love deepening with each passing year. Florence leaned her head on Owen's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, strong and protective as always. This was home. Not the house, not the ranch, but this. Being held by the man she loved, surrounded by the life they had built together. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Owen whispered back. "Always and forever." And as the stars came out one by one over the Texas prairie, they sat together, two hearts beating as one, grateful for every moment they had been given together and looking forward to however many more they had left. Their story, which had begun with a desperate widow and a lonely rancher, had become something beautiful. a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the enduring nature of true love. They had found each other when they both needed saving, and they had spent the rest of their lives proving that sometimes. The best love stories are the ones that start with someone simply saying, "You already have a home here." The years ahead brought more joy and some sorrow, as is the way of life. They lost friends and celebrated new births. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. They continued to work the ranch until neither of them could any more, and then they watched with pride as the next generation took over completely. On their 40th anniversary, Florence was 70 and Owen was 72. They celebrated with a quiet dinner prepared by Emma, who had moved back to the ranch after retiring from teaching. The whole family came, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, filling the house with love and laughter. That night, as they prepared for bed, Owen helped Florence with her nightgown, his fingers gentle as always. They climbed into bed together, and Florence settled into her favorite position, her head on his chest, his arm around her. 40 years, she said softly. Who would have thought I would have? From that first day I knew you were it for me. I fought it for a while, told myself I was just being charitable, but I knew too. I fell in love with you so fast it scared me. Best thing we ever did was stop being scared and just love each other. Best thing indeed. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Florence dreamed of that first day, of driving up to the ranch with fear and hope warring in her heart, of Owen standing on the porch looking so stern, and then saying those words that had changed everything. You already have a home here. She had found so much more than a home. She had found her soulmate, her partner, her great love. And as she drifted deeper into sleep, warm and safe in Owen's arms, Florence Sinclair knew that she had lived a blessed life. She had been loved well and had loved well in return. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?